Once one of the greatest comeback stories and most promising young players in the league, now the biggest laughingstock in the NBA. Once going toe-to-toe with the big three of the Miami Heat seemingly by himself, now he's the worst playoff star since segregation. And I'm not even kidding. So what happened? After 2 years at Fresno State, Paul George was the 10th pick in the 2010 NBA draft to the Indiana Pacers. In hindsight, he was definitely a steal in that draft, being the 5th wing player selected after players like Wesley Johnson, Evan Turner, Al-Farouq Aminu, and Gordon Hayward, who it's safe to say he's already had better careers than all of them. So, after a pretty average rookie season, playing behind players like Danny Granger, Mike Dunleavy, and Brandon Rush, PG didn't get that many minutes his rookie year. However, PG finally hit his stride as 30 in the league. While he only scored 7.8 points as a rookie and 12 as a sophomore, he jumps to 17.4 points in his third season, along with 4 assists, 7.6 rebounds, and 1.8 steals. By this time in his career, he became a regular starter, starting 79 out of all the 79 games that he played, while also playing 37 minutes a game. This was also the year he won Most Improved Player and was selected for his first All-Star appearance. This year he also made the All-Defensive Second Team and the All-NBA Third Team. The Pacers finished 3rd in the East that year, and after an impressive regular season by Paul George, he really began to make his name in the playoffs, especially the Eastern Conference Finals that they made that year. Since Danny Granger was basically out the entire season with an injury, the Pacers team was led by Paul George and Roy Hibbert, 2 young players in the league at the time. The Pacers took the reigning champion Miami Heat to 7 games with strong performances from Paul George all series. This series is definitely one that put Paul George on a lot of NBA fans' radars, even though they lost. So one important thing to note is that in Game 7, Paul George only shot 2 for 9, but at the time he was a young player, so nobody really thought too much of it. The Heat did go on to win their 2nd consecutive title against the Spurs that year, but everyone was still excited to see what this young Pacers team would accomplish next season. And spoiler alert, they didn't disappoint. Going into his 4th year in the league, Paul George was definitely becoming a star in this league. He averaged 21 points per game, 3.5 assists, 6.8 rebounds, and 1.9 steals. He had another All-Star appearance, an All-Defensive First Team, as well as another All-NBA Third Team selection this season. He was slowly becoming one of the best two-way players in the league at the time. The Pacers finished 1st in the East that season with a 56-26 record. Needless to say, everybody was ready for an Eastern Conference Final rematch. So again, this became another breakout point in Paul George's career. While this series only went in 6 games as opposed to 7 the year before, PG gave another strong performance, averaging 24 points per game, 4 assists, along with 5 rebounds. He also put up great stat lines in Game 5 and 6, putting up 37 and 29 in those games. So needless to say, Paul George was now on everybody's radar. Unfortunately, soon things wouldn't be so positive. So for those that remember, following that season was the Team USA year, and during one of the scrimmages, Paul George suffered one of the most gruesome injuries the NBA has ever seen. This injury would sideline him for almost the entirety of the following season. However, Paul George did end up playing the final 6 games of the next season, coming off the bench and being on a heavy minutes restriction. But with that being said, many didn't believe PG would see the floor at all that season. So even though he only played 6 games, getting on the court at all was definitely a positive sign. Next season is where PG really shocked everyone. He came back with a career high in points, averaging 23, on top of 4 assists and 7 rebounds. He made another All-Star appearance, another All-NBA Third Team, and an All-Defensive Second Team. Pacers did only finish 7th in the East that year with a 45-37 record, but for Paul George to even be playing at that high of a level was inspiring in itself. After an impressive first-round performance by Paul George, they ultimately lost to the Raptors in 7 games. He averaged 27 points per game, 7 rebounds, and 4 assists while shooting extremely efficiently. So it's safe to say that playoff series was not Paul George's fault. So PG then followed up next season with much of the same, another All-Star appearance and extremely similar numbers. Again, Pacers finished 7th in the East, this time matching up against LeBron, and a much anticipated PG versus LeBron playoff matchup. However, this series was a lot shorter. This time, LeBron and the Cavs ended up sweeping the Pacers, although this is arguably Paul George's best playoff series. He averaged 28 points per game, 8.8 rebounds, and 7.3 assists. However, it was yet another first-round exit. So, as to be expected when most stars aren't having a lot of playoff success, the rumors started. While there is speculation that PG may have wanted out, it was still an extreme shock that PG requested a trade. After officially requesting a trade, some of the teams reported that were on the top of his list were LA and the Miami Heat. However, he did not end up in either of those teams. As you all know, Paul George did end up with the Thunder. While the Thunder may not have been his top choice, teaming up with Russ and Carmelo definitely looked like a team to be reckoned with. There were extremely high hopes for this team as the three stars teamed up. So after 2 first-round exits, he can't use any excuse that he has no help now. The Thunder finished 4th in the West with a record of 48-34 after PG averages 22 points per game, 3 assists, and 4.7 rebounds. Now comes the playoffs and the birth of the infamous nickname Playoff P. So, as most people know, when they hear Playoff P, that's usually a terrible sign. And this is where the collapse starts in Paul George's career. So in this first round playoff matchup, the Thunder are facing the Jazz, led by rookie sensation Donovan Mitchell. So in a big upset, the Jazz end up beating the Thunder in 6 in this series. So in the closeout game, PG puts up one of a string of terrible playoff performances to come, putting up 2 for 16 with only 5 points and 6 turnovers. So yet another first round exit, making it the 3rd straight year Paul George can't make it out of the first round. Even with that being said, PG does sign an extension, claiming that OKC is where he wants to be. So with that being said, that gave a lot of Thunder fans hope that PG and Russ could work things out and hopefully make a run in the playoffs this year. And this hope continued into the regular season as PG made yet another huge jump in his career, having an MVP type season. He averaged 28 points per game, 8 rebounds, 4 assists, and a league-leading 2.2 steals. He was selected to another All-Star game this year, being All-NBA First Team, All-Defensive First Team, and finishing 3rd in MVP voting. OKC finished 6th in the West with a 49-33 record. Now, PG did suffer a shoulder injury in that season, but it was healed by the time of the playoffs, and he did claim that he was ready. So, with that being said, going into the first round, Playoff P is back. Paul George picked up right where he left off in last year's playoffs, putting up an 8 for 24 performance in Game 1 and a 3 for 16 performance in Game 3. The Thunder ended up losing to the Blazers in the first round in only 5 games, and despite having a good Game 5, Paul George still found himself the butt of some jokes and some pretty good memes. Damian Lillard ended up hitting one of the best buzzer beaters I've ever seen in Paul George's face, having the infamous wave off. So this marks yet another first round exit for Paul George, making it his 4th straight year. So needless to say, Paul George's antics get even worse. 1 year after signing an extension and saying that he wants to stay in OKC, he works behind the scenes in the offseason to request a trade and ends up finding his way onto the Los Angeles Clippers to join Kawhi Leonard. So again, the talks of winning a ring come immediately. There's a string of social media videos with Lou Will, Pat Bev, IG Lives. The Clippers are talking crazy. So much like the Clippers, the media also have extremely high hopes for this team. Everyone thinks they're the immediate title favorites. Now, while this team did battle injuries early in the season, along with the league shutdown, there wasn't a lot of time to see this team at full force. But when they did, they looked pretty good. So this season, Paul George averaged 21.5 points, 3.9 assists, along with 5.7 rebounds. And the Clippers finished 2nd in the West. Along with NBA restart, Playoff P was back in effect. So in the first round, the Clippers found themselves against the Mavs, and Paul George had one of the worst playoff performances by a star ever. Literally ever. So in Game 2, Paul George went 4 for 17. Game 3, he went 3 for 16. Game 4, he went 3 for 14. In Game 6, he shot 6 for 19. Paul George was the first player to shoot under 25% in 3 straight playoff games since Bob Cousy in 1960. Literally since segregation. Martin Luther King didn't even have a dream yet. You realize how crazy that sounds? So, following Game 4 in a press conference, PG did talk about his mental struggles battling things such as depression, leading to why he had such a disappointing postseason so far. and he did have a bounce back game 5, even though he did kind of go back to his old shooting in game 6. So regardless of that, the Clippers did end up beating the Mavs in game 6, going into round 2 against the Nuggets. And boy, this was a fun one. So, as everyone knows, the Clippers found themselves up 3-1 against the Nuggets and started to look like that championship team that they were talking about all season. But things quickly collapsed. The Nuggets find themselves winning game 5, and then game 6, and then game 7. So, many call this the greatest choke of all time. Kawhi and PG combining for 0 points in the fourth quarter of game 7. PG shooting 4 for 16. And the Clippers even had a lead at halftime. And they had a double-digit lead in every single one of these closeout games. Being heavy title favorites, trash talking all season long, there was definitely some slander on Twitter that day, to say the least. And honestly, nobody can even feel bad for them because they brought it upon themselves. So, as many know, Dame and CJ were in rare form that night as they were getting jokes off the entire game. Priceless, honestly. Pandemic P, way off P, Nick Wright ripping the Clippers the entire next morning. It was a sight to see for those 24 hours. Again, a lot of people call it the greatest choke in NBA history. Then, of course, the press conferences. You have Paul George, capping as usual, backtracking with his win now statement, saying that this was a chemistry building year. It was not a good look for that team. There were even reports that came out of PG giving a post-game pep talk and other players rolling their eyes at him. So it's been looking kind of bad for the Clippers, to say the least. PG has definitely lost some respect around the league. And not just the league, but NBA fans everywhere. Again, man, the strange case of playoff P. Going from NBA's brightest, most promising young star, facing a tragic injury, an inspiring comeback, now just the laughingstock of the NBA. Forcing his way off of 2 teams for just yet another playoff collapse. And man, this Clippers one was a tough one because everybody, and I do mean everybody, was looking forward to an LA versus LA conference finals, though we just won't get this year. PG is down atrocious right now. But if I'm being honest, I hope he can recover because I genuinely like watching PG play. Just not in the playoffs. But yeah, man, that's going to do it for today's video. If you liked it, don't forget to leave a like, subscribe. Really helps the channel out. Leave a comment, let me know what you thought. And until next time, it's been Quincy ID, and I'm out.